It is the 12th day of July 2023. Hello and welcome to the News International Edition. We are coming to you live from our Vision Group headquarters here in Kampala, Uganda. Now, our top story, Kenyan President William Samoei Ruto and Iranian President Ibrahim Raisi have pledged to strengthen bilateral ties and sign a number of trade agreements during a visit by President Raisi to the East African country. This marks the beginning of President Raisi's Africa trip to strengthen relations between Iran and the continent.
The leaders of Iran and Kenya pledged to strengthen their ties as their government signed a raft of trade agreements Wednesday during Iranian President Ibrahim Raisi's maiden visit to the East African nation. The visit comes as the Islamic Republic tries to shore up diplomatic support to ease its international isolation, with Raisi also due to travel to Uganda and Zimbabwe this week on the first Africa tour by an Iranian leader in 11 years. Ruto described Iran as a critical strategic partner for Kenya and said the two governments had signed 5 memoranda of understanding focusing on areas including information technology, investment promotion, and fisheries.
This highly productive visit has been an excellent opportunity for us to renew and reaffirm the strong bonds of friendship and solidarity between the governments and people of Kenya and Iran. Today, President Raisi and I have witnessed the signing of 5 memoranda of understanding on cooperation in information, communication and technology, fisheries, animal health and livestock products, and investment promotion. This memoranda will enhance and further deepen our bilateral relations for sustainable growth and development between our two countries.
Raisi described his visit to Kenya as a turning point in the development of relations between the two countries, adding that his talks with Ruto reflected the determination and resolve of both countries for expansion of economic and trade cooperation, political cooperation, cultural cooperation. We believe that relations between Iran and Kenya could be strengthened on a daily basis. The African continent is full of capacity and opportunity. Despite all the threats and sanctions of our adversaries, we have managed to register advances in different fields, and today we should call Iran a technology hub. We have managed to overcome present sanctions and also upgraded our status in different fields. In addition to meeting Kenyan President William Ruto, Raisi will head to Uganda later Wednesday for talks with Ugandan counterpart Yoweri Museveni and see Zimbabwean President Emmerson Mnangagwa on Thursday. Africa has emerged as a diplomatic battleground in recent months, with Russia and the West also trying to court support over Moscow's invasion of Ukraine, which has had a devastating economic impact on the continent, sending food prices soaring. Western powers have also sought to deepen trade ties with the continent, along with India and China, which has been on an infrastructure spending spree in Africa. According to Iran's official IRNA news agency, Raisi is heading a delegation that includes the foreign minister as well as senior business people. Iranian Foreign Ministry spokesman Nassar Kanani earlier expressed optimism that the 3-day trip could help bolster economic and trade ties with African nations. Iran has stepped up its diplomacy in recent months to reduce its isolation and offset the impact of crippling sanctions reimposed since the 2018 withdrawal of the United States from a painstakingly negotiated nuclear deal. In June, Raisi undertook a Latin American tour that included Venezuela, Nicaragua, and Cuba before a trip to Indonesia.
Now, the latest coming from President Raisi's African trip is at the moment in Kampala, Uganda, meeting President Yoweri Museveni. Please stay tuned for more details on our 9 p.m. news. Now, still from Kenya, Kenyan officers fired tear gas on protesters on Wednesday as they defied a police ban to join demonstrations called by opposition leader Raila Odinga against a raft of tax hikes. Shops were shut and security was tight in the capital, Nairobi, where police deployed tear gas against stone-throwing demonstrators in the slum of Mathare. Tear gas was also used to disperse crowds in the port city of Mombasa. Last week's rallies in several cities turned violence, with 6 people killed, according to the Interior Ministry, as rights campaigners accused police of taking a heavy-handed approach towards the demonstrations. Now, away from Kenya, at a summit in Vilnius of the 31 NATO nations, Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg insisted the alliance had never issued a strong message on Ukraine's membership of the US-led defense alliance, despite the bloc having dashed Ukraine's hopes for a clear timeline, saying they would offer an invite to become a member only when conditions are met. Although he says that NATO leaders agreed to remove the requirement for the membership action plan, shortening the eventual process Kyiv would have to go through to enter the alliance. The failure to go much beyond a 2008 vow on future membership appeared a bitter blow to Ukrainian leader Volodymyr Zelensky.
NATO leaders on Tuesday dashed Ukrainian leader Volodymyr Zelensky's hopes for a clear timeline to join the alliance, saying they would offer an invitation to become a member only when conditions are met. At a summit in Vilnius of 31 NATO nations, Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg insisted the alliance had never used stronger language to back Ukraine in its bitter fight to defeat the Russian invasion.
Today, allies have agreed a package of three elements to bring Ukraine closer to NATO. First, a new multi-year assistance program for Ukraine to enable the transition from Soviet era to NATO standards, training and doctrines, to help rebuild Ukraine's security and defense sector, and to cover critical needs like fuel, demining equipment and medical supplies. We reaffirmed that Ukraine will become a member of NATO and agreed to remove the requirement for a membership action plan. This would change Ukraine's membership path from a two-step process to a one-step process.
But the fight to go much beyond a 2008 vow on future membership appeared a bitter blow to Zelensky, who was in Vilnius to address an admiring crowd of Lithuanian supporters in a packed city square ahead of his meetings with the NATO leaders. Mindful of Zelensky's disappointment over his hopes for a membership timetable, Western officials stressed that there would be a broader package of support proposals designed to give Ukraine a military edge over the invader.
Then we also send a strong political message with the language on membership, including the language which is now in the communique on invitation. There's never been a stronger message from NATO at any time, both when it comes to the political message on the path forward for membership and the concrete support from NATO allies, military support, but also the practical support on how to ensure full interoperability. Under our new plans, NATO aims to have 300,000 troops at high readiness, including substantial air and naval power.
Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky and British Prime Minister Rishi Sunak also held a face-to-face meeting as part of the NATO summit in Vilnius, Lithuania, where NATO member states are meeting to discuss the issue of military aid to Ukraine and its accession to the alliance. NATO leaders pledged that Ukraine's future is in NATO and shorten the eventual process Kyiv would have to go through to enter the alliance. We will be in a position to extend an invitation to Ukraine to join the alliance when allies agree and conditions are met, a statement said. As Zelensky was speaking, Moscow upped the pressure on the NATO leaders meeting in Vilnius, claiming that its forces had made a 1.5 kilometers of progress, more than a mile across a 2-kilometer wide section of the Eastern Front. If confirmed, this would bring them closer to the rail hub of Lyman, a town in the Donbas region of the east of the country. It was captured by Russian forces last year, only to be liberated by Ukraine in its October 2022 counteroffensive. Germany's Chancellor Olaf Scholz said that the G7 group of major industrialized economies would issue a declaration on long-term support to kick in once peace is obtained. This is expected to be announced on Wednesday after the NATO summit ends. In the nearer term, Berlin pledged another 700 million euros, an equivalent to $771 million in military assistance to Kyiv. The new aid includes 2 Patriot missile system launchers, another 40 Marder infantry fighting vehicles, and 25 Leopard 1 tanks. President Emmanuel Macron also said France was joining Britain in supplying long-range Scalp or Storm Shadow cruise missiles to allow Ukraine to strike Russian targets deep behind the front line. And Denmark and the Netherlands said an 11-nation coalition will start training Ukrainian pilots to fly F-16 fighter jets next month, with a new training center to be set up in Romania. While Eastern European nations had pushed for an explicit timetable to allow Kyiv join, the US and Germany are reluctant to go beyond an earlier vow that it will become a member one day. Biden, who will meet Zelensky on Wednesday, has said there is no agreement to offer Kyiv membership while the war with Russia rages, as this could drag NATO directly into the conflict. The biggest war in Europe since World War II has propelled NATO into the most sweeping overhaul of its defenses since the end of the Cold War.
Still in Ukraine, soldiers at the Eastern Front welcome an array of military aid as they will be able to deploy in the country's bitter fight against the Russian invasion. And these included French tanks, Italian guns, and American advanced precision kill weapon systems. Yuri, the captain of the crew of an Italian howitzer, even says he welcomes the controversial U.S. decision to send cluster munitions to Kyiv, telling our reporters that they have been in their arsenal will make them head and shoulders above the Russians in terms of range and effectiveness. On Ukraine's Eastern Front, soldiers welcomed a controversial U.S. decision to send cluster munitions to Kyiv, and that will give them an advantage on the battlefield. Yuri, the captain of the crew of an Italian howitzer, pointed out that Russia itself uses the weapons which are banned in many parts of the world. The U.S. too on Friday said it would deliver cluster bombs to Ukraine despite criticism. Unexploded submunitions left in the ground can cause civilian deaths long after the conflict is over.
The equipment is good if it could be adapted to the realities of our own situation and uses. If you use its advantages, you can forget about its disadvantages, for example, the lack of armor, but we have to work on it.
Такі снаряди в себе на озброєнні, на голову, знову ж таки, ми вийдемо на голову.
Having such projectiles in our arsenal, cluster ones will be head and shoulders above in terms of range. Cluster ones go further, and in terms of their effectiveness, they quite accurately go where they need to go, and the effectiveness is impressive.
Куди нам, куди треба, і ефективність їхня, вона.
In our direction, the enemies dug in very hard. They stood here for a year. At first we advanced. Then they took that spot. They have such trenches, just underground cities. When you look from a drone or when soldiers take their positions, you look there and think how difficult it is to conduct a counterattack. It's very difficult. First, there are minefields, both anti-personnel and anti-tank. Secondly, there are such fortifications that are really very difficult to take. The value of this system is that the guys firing the rockets may not be able to see their targets, but the gunner is very close to the target and guides this missile.
Now, North Korea has fired a long-range ballistic missile, the South Korean military reported on Wednesday, days after Pyongyang threatened to shoot down U.S. pipelines that had violated its airspace. Relations between the two Koreas are now one of their lowest points ever, with diplomacy stalled and North Korean leader Kim Jong-un calling for increased weapons development, including tactical nukes.
North Korea has fired a long-range ballistic missile, the South Korean military said Wednesday, days after Pyongyang threatened to down U.S. pipelines that violated its airspace. Relations between the two Koreas are at one of their lowest points ever, with diplomacy stalled and North Korean leader Kim Jong-un calling for increased weapons development, including tactical nukes. In response, Seoul and Washington have ramped up security cooperation, vowing that Pyongyang would face a nuclear response and the end of its current government were it to use its nuclear weapons against the allies. Kim Suk-woo, chairman of Citizens Alliance for North Korean Human Rights, says there is increasing violation of human rights as well as regional peace.
이 지역 평화 질서를 깨트리는 일이죠.
North Korea's missile test is breaking regional peace and order. North Korea's nuclear and missile development are prohibited by UN resolutions and they are violating them. I think this is an act that greatly jeopardizes peace in this region. South Korea, along with international cooperation, must stop them.
북한이라는 사회는
The North Korean regime is spending a tremendous amount of foreign currency on the development of missiles and nuclear weapons. If they were to use that money for peaceful purposes, they would be able to import corn or food and North Koreans wouldn't have to starve to death. South Korea's military said it had detected the launch of a long-range ballistic missile fired from the Pyongyang area around 10 a.m. South Korean residents expressed dissatisfaction from North Korea's current military activities.
당연히 북한이 체제가 좀 바뀌어야 되고.
Since North Korea fires missiles every other day, we are really desensitized to it. It doesn't mean much. We just need to be thoroughly prepared.
그들은 뭐
I think it's a bit dangerous and it feels like World War III will happen. Because of North Korea's provocations, our country, their next-door neighbor, could be subject to damage. So I think North Korea should restrain itself from carrying out any more provocations. The ballistic missile was fired on a lofted trajectory and flew 1,000 kilometers or 620 miles before splashing down in the East Sea, the Joint Chiefs of Staff said, referring to the body of water also known as the Sea of Japan. A lofted trajectory involves firing a missile up and not out, a method Pyongyang has previously said it employs in some weapons tests to avoid flying over neighboring countries. The launch is a grave provocation that damages the peace and security of the Korean peninsula and violates UN sanctions on Pyongyang, the JCS said, calling on North Korea to stop such actions. Pyongyang last fired one of its most powerful intercontinental ballistic missiles in April, the purportedly solid-fueled Hwasong-18, and in February launched a Hwasong-15, which flew a similar 989 kilometers. Wednesday's launch came after North Korea on Monday accused a United States spy plane of violating its airspace and condemned Washington's plans to deploy a nuclear missile submarine near the Korean peninsula. Pyongyang also times its shows of force to disrupt what it perceives as diplomatic coordination against it, in this case, South Korea and Japan's leaders meeting during the NATO summit.
And finally, from October, France will pay a bonus to encourage people to have their clothes and shoes repaired rather than throwing them away. The government has reported the move aims to cut down on the 700 metric tons of clothes thrown away by French people each year, two-thirds of which ends up in landfills. From October, consumers will be able to be supported in the repair of their clothes and shoes. Secretary of State for Ecology Barnicourt reported on Tuesday during a visit to the Paris premises of La Cassarine, a hub for responsible fashion. She invited all sewing workshops and shoemakers to join the system to be labeled by eco-organization Refashion. Under the scheme, customers will be able to claim €7 for mending a heel and 10 to 25 euros for clothing repairs from €154 million to fund set up to cover 2023 to 2024. In France, 3.3 billion pieces of clothing, shoes and household linen were put on the market in 2022, according to Refashion, which has been instructed by the government to support a more sustainable industry. The goal is to support those who do the repairs, Colliard said, referring to sewing workshops, but also those brands which offer repair services. Modeled after the household appearance repair bonus, the aid is part of a vast reform of the textile sector, one of the most polluting industries on the planet, initiated by the French government since the end of 2022. Its objectives include forcing brands to have more traceability and financially support organizations specializing in reusing and recycling of clothing. And that's all the international news we had for you today. We'll be back again tomorrow at 4 p.m. Thank you for watching and have yourselves a fantastic afternoon.